No matter how tough things got though, there were always people willing to help out. I had so many aunties and uncles, I can't tell you which ones were the real ones or not. First off, there was the uncle who lent your mum money while your dad was in prison. We called him Uncle Boot, due to the fact he had one shoe with a much bigger sole on it than on the other. Mam said it was called an orthopaedic shoe, and for some reason, whenever he came round, our Des would always ask him whether it gave him 3D vision and the California blues, and then he'd start singing, "Orthopaedic shoes, orthopaedic shoes." I quite liked him, even though I wasn't supposed to know he was a lone wolf or a lone shark or whatever it was, but I still knew what was going on. Even when Mam, who was trying to protect me from the ways of the world, would reply to his question, "What can I get you?" by asking for a Gilbert O'Sullivan. Alone again, naturally. At which point, Uncle Boot would undo a compartment in his large-soled shoe and pass some money to Mam, and then pass a traffic light to me, saying, "Some lolly for you, and a lolly for you." Like I say, I quite liked him. Sometimes Mam was really pleased to see Uncle Boot and made a right fuss of him. Other times we all had to hide when he came round. Les called it a lupine-themed double bind. If we let him in, it's because we needed to keep the wolf from the door, and if we didn't, it was because we needed to keep the wolf from the door. Worse, if we were all hiding, you could hear him knocking on the window and saying stuff like, little pigs, let me in." One time, Des, who was presumably at a loss because he'd had to stop hitting things, replied, very quietly for him, "Not by the hairs on our chins," which annoyed all of us, but Mam especially, because she was a bit self-conscious about the occasional whisker appearing on the lower part of her face. Nothing she couldn't have probably dealt with by way of something from Smith and Nephews, but in any case, she was put out enough for her to stand up and shout at Des, "This is me, I've told you. You march to the beat of your drum, and I'll march to the beat of mine. It's not like I'm afraid to be seen." Unfortunately, at that point she realised she had been seen, as Uncle Boot was looking straight at her through the window. So we ended up having to let him in, and in the absence of any money, told him to help himself to Dad's watch, which stood untouched on the mantelpiece. After he'd left, Mam said, "He's welcome to it. He can shove it up his backside for all I care." A suggestion that wasn't lost on the rest of us, because that's how Dad had acquired it in the first place. Then there was your uncle who looked after your Mam while your dad was in prison. There was a few of those. I can still remember some of them. There was Uncle Brian, he liked a bit of a drink. Uncle Steve, who I seem to remember liked wearing Mam's clothes and makeup. Uncle Andy, who had a high singing voice. And Uncle Mick, who actually taught Des a bit of drums. All of which were sweet, although Brian could be a bit of a hellraiser, especially if Mam let him out on a Saturday night. They were all very good when it came to helping Mam out as well. So much so, they were often already there and ready to go when I got up in the morning. Sometimes they were so keen to get what Brian called a piece of the action, it was them that actually woke me up, what with all the banging going on in the next room and what have you. But the one I remember most of all, probably because he came to live with us eventually, was Uncle Sandy. His surname was Beach, and you'd be forgiven for thinking that's how he ended up with the name Sandy, but it was down to the fact he was the caretaker at our local school, and was always in the school playground cleaning up vomit. One auntie I'll never forget was Aunt Queenie, who lived on Marm Street. She was a fortune teller, and Mam called her a sage-like figure, and said when it came to the supernatural, she really knew her onions. She was amazing. I used to go round there with Mam, and just before you were about to ring the doorbell, you could hear a voice saying, "Come in." It was uncanny, just like that hunchback of Nostradamus fella, who could also predict things. and also knew a thing or two about ringing bells as well. Anyway, once inside, and Mam would talk for a while, and there'd be a certain amount of cards and palm reading going on, you know, that sort of thing, none of which caught my attention really, until one time Mam suddenly asked Queenie if she could read my tea leaves. Well, Queenie said she didn't normally do kids' readings, but she said she would as long as Mam provided parental guidance and I didn't try and make a monkey out of the process. Once again, though, it all seemed fairly uninteresting, until Queenie suddenly said that I was going to travel just like me dad. So I said, "What you on about? My dad's been in jail for most of his adult life. He's never been anywhere." But Queenie insisted. "Well, he must be breaking out every night and breaking back in first thing in the morning, 'cause it says here he's definitely travelled." Now, I don't know how much you can get out of the tea leaves, but I could see the strain on Mam's face, so I knew something was brewing. "Come on," Mam said weakly. "We'd better go." Well, it turned out me real dad was actually someone Mam had met, having just come away from visiting Dad in prison, and seeing that she was upset, he'd comforted her briefly. He'd comforted her briefly in a place called the Seaman's Mission. And that was it. She couldn't tell me much else, except that he'd sailed off to the Far East apparently to become a Buddhist, and that his name, and my middle name, was Arthur. Well, to say I was devastated would be an understatement. I mean, there's me believing my real dad is this bloke who sits around all day doing very little, and it turns out it's some other bloke who sits around all day doing very little. I mean, I don't know. You think of things in a permanent, fixed sort of way, and it turns out they're anything but. It's especially devastating after all Mam had said about semen as well. I mean, semen. I realise it was a load off her chest, but to me it just looked like she was rubbing it in. I was a bit disappointed, to say the least, but then I thought back. A bit disappointed, a bit less naive, and I did feel a little bit better as a result. I have since done a bit of research as far as tracking down my real dad's concerned, and even been to the Seaman's Mission to check their records, but to no avail, although I do still get their mail out, the Seaman's E-Mission. As for Queenie, we never went round again. I did ask Mam why that was, and she said, "Well, you either believe in it or you don't, do you?" She said she did manage to speak to Queenie about my reading, and though she didn't go into any detail, she did say, "I can tell you this much, there's no such thing as a happy medium."